It began in fire. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire tore through the heart of the city. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. Homes, businesses, wooden houses all went up in flames. People were left with nothing but charred streets and memories. Yet from that ruin came a fierce hope. The city rebuilt, not just to survive, but to soar. Chicago's leaders and citizens resolved to make their town stronger, safer, and more modern. They saw an opportunity. In trying to rise from the ashes, they could reach for the sky. One of the earliest dreams of that new Chicago was to build taller than before. Engineers and architects wondered, what if buildings did not need to squat low, constrained by heavy brick walls? What if they could stretch upward, supported from within? A man named William LeBaron Jenney carried that vision. He was an engineer-architect, trained in both engineering and architecture. After the fire, he thought deeply about the limits of masonry construction. Brick walls could only go so high. Under their own weight, they grew thicker, cost more, and blocked light. Jenney proposed something radical, a building held up not by thick walls outside, but by a strong internal frame. He experimented with iron and steel columns and beams. This frame would carry the weight. The outer walls would become thinner, almost like a skin rather than the building's backbone. In 1884, Jenney won a commission from the home insurance company. They wanted a tall, fireproof building in the Loop, Chicago's downtown. They trusted him. He began to design a structure unlike any before in Chicago. During construction, many people were afraid. City officials worried the building might fall. After all, they had never seen a building rise so tall for so little weight. Some insisted on halting work while they investigated whether it was safe. But by 1885, the building stood on LaSalle Street, 10 stories high, 138 feet tall. When people looked up, they felt something new, possibility. The steel and iron frame held steady. The walls, much lighter now, allowed more windows and more light. The home insurance building was not grand in ornament. It was simple but daring. It did not parade its height. Yet it carried within it a revolution. That building changed how people thought. It told a story that Chicago could reach higher, that new technology could reshape city life, and that after great loss, one could rebuild bolder than before. The city watched, some with excitement, some with fear. But a seed was planted, the seed of the skyscraper. As the years passed, this new way of building would spread in Chicago. Architects would push further, competitors would emerge, and from this fragile but daring beginning, the city's skyline would be forever changed. The completion of the home insurance building marked not just a new building, but a new era. An era where steel and iron, not heavy masonry, would allow human ambition to climb. The success of Jenney's design gave confidence to other architects. It showed that structural steel could reliably carry a tall building. It opened the door for a generation of skyscraper builders, architects, and engineers in Chicago. City officials at first feared the lightweight frame would be unsafe. They paused construction to investigate its structural stability. Also, while it is considered the first modern skyscraper, the building was not purely steel. Jenney used wrought iron, cast iron, and even masonry at its base. After the home insurance building proved that steel frames could work, a new challenge arose. It was no longer only about height. Now Chicago asked, how should a skyscraper look? What is the balance between beauty and function? The answer would not come easily. A group of architects emerged, later known as the Chicago School. Their members included William LeBaron Jenney, of course, but also John Wellborn Root, Daniel Burnham, Louis Sullivan, and firms such as Hullabird and Roche. They shared one goal: to build tall, efficient, and modern buildings, but each had a different vision of what that meant. Louis Sullivan famously said, "Form follows function." He wanted a building to express its purpose. For him, a skyscraper should show its vertical strength. He rejected excessive ornamentation. He believed that a building's height and structure could be beautiful on their own. Some saw this as daring, others called it plain or unfinished. John Wellborn Root leaned toward decoration and elegance. With Daniel Burnham, he created buildings that combined steel frames with rich facades. The Rookery Building, 1888, is an example. It used a steel frame but also welcomed light and decorative marble, iron, and glass. It felt modern, yet familiar to people accustomed to classic architecture. The tension between these two approaches sparked debate. Critics argued over whether tall buildings should be purely functional or should honor tradition. Real estate developers worried that too much ornament would be expensive. City residents wondered if these tall, thin structures would cast long shadows or feel oppressive. Meanwhile, construction technology advanced. Steel frames became stronger and cheaper. Elevators, once a novelty, became reliable and fast. Fireproofing methods improved. Architects and engineers pushed limits higher, creating buildings with 12, 15, and 20 stories. With every new structure, the city skyline changed, and the public watched with awe and concern. Some turning points highlight these debates. The Monodock Building, for example, by Burnham and Root, combined masonry and steel. Its massive walls reflected caution. At the time, some critics said it appeared heavy and foreboding. But within its walls, steel beams carried most of the weight, a quiet revolution hidden in plain sight. Another controversy arose with the Chicago building boom after the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Burnham had led the exposition, which celebrated neoclassical design. Some architects wanted skyscrapers to resemble those fair buildings, elegant but restrained. Sullivan and other modernists disagreed. This tension created a rift in the city's architectural culture. Innovation versus tradition, modernity versus classical beauty. These debates shaped the identity of Chicago architecture. The city became a laboratory where architects experimented with height, light, and facade design. Each completed building tested public tolerance, developer budgets, and technical ingenuity. The lessons learned here would influence skyscrapers nationally and internationally. The Rookery Building contained one of the first light courts in a skyscraper, allowing sunlight to reach interior offices. This design influenced future buildings across Chicago and New York. By the 1890s, Chicago's skyline was changing rapidly. Skyscrapers were rising, and architects were pushing boundaries. But this era was not without tension. Building tall was expensive. Financing these ambitious projects required courage and vision, and sometimes the risks were enormous. Banks and investors faced uncertainty. A steel frame building was new technology. No one could guarantee it would retain value or attract tenants. If the building failed, investors could lose everything. Developers debated endlessly over costs, design, and safety. Every new skyscraper became a gamble. One key turning point came with the Masonic Temple, completed in 1892. It was 21 stories tall, one of the tallest in the world at that time. The building demonstrated technical mastery. Steel frames, elevators, and fireproofing combined to reach unprecedented heights. Yet it also revealed social tension. Many Chicagoans worried it would block sunlight, cast shadows on streets, and create discomfort in the dense city center. Some called it arrogant. Others marveled at its ambition. During this same period, economic instability tested the city. The Panic of 1893 struck the nation. Banks failed, investments vanished, and construction projects stalled. Developers who had planned tall buildings had to delay or cancel their visions. Some projects that began with promise were abandoned, leaving steel frames incomplete or half-empty. The city skyline grew uneven, a mix of bold success and halted ambition. Despite the uncertainty, Innovation continued. Louis Sullivan and his firm completed the Carson, Peary, Scott and Company building. While lower in height compared to the Masonic Temple, it demonstrated refined design and functional elegance. Large windows and open interior spaces appealed to tenants, showing that skyscrapers could be both practical and beautiful. Another major figure, Daniel Burnham, navigated these economic challenges with strategic planning. He focused on large office buildings, including the Reliance Building, which emphasized light, steel frame strength, and modernity. These structures became symbols of resilience in a financially fragile environment. Economic uncertainty forced architects and developers to innovate. Steel and glass were not just technical experiments, they became financial tools. Light-filled interiors, open floor plans, and efficient layouts made skyscrapers more attractive to tenants. Buildings had to earn their keep, merging aesthetics with practicality. Chicago became a proving ground for how modern cities could balance ambition with financial reality. Some early skyscrapers were demolished or significantly altered within decades because their steel frames were ahead of their time. The Masonic Temple, for instance, was demolished in 1939, only 47 years after completion. Its short life reflects both technical progress and shifting economic pressures. By the turn of the 20th century, Chicago had become a laboratory of skyscraper design. Architects and engineers were no longer experimenting with a single building. They were refining an entire system of construction. The city was learning how to climb higher, faster, and smarter. One major breakthrough was the widespread use of the steel skeleton frame. Early skyscrapers had combined steel with heavy masonry. Now, architects fully embraced steel. It allowed taller buildings with thinner walls, larger windows, and open floor plans. Light-filled offices in ways that had been impossible before. Tenants appreciated this innovation, and developers saw higher rents as a reward. Daniel Burnham played a central role. He understood that skyscrapers needed to satisfy both engineering and aesthetics. His Reliance Building, 1895 to 1995, used steel framing with extensive glass windows. It introduced an almost transparent facade, giving the building a lightness unusual for the time. It challenged critics who had feared tall buildings would feel oppressive. People marveled at its elegance. Louis Sullivan continued to define the style of modern skyscrapers. He combined vertical emphasis with ornamentation that expressed a building's purpose. His Wainwright Building in St. Louis demonstrated that Chicago-style ideas could influence other cities. Sullivan's philosophy inspired a generation of architects, proving that skyscrapers could communicate both strength and beauty. Technological innovation was not limited to structure. Elevators and safety systems transformed city life. In early skyscrapers, elevator companies competed to build faster, smoother, and safer lifts. People who once feared heights now traveled comfortably to the upper floors. This change was essential. A building is only useful if people can reach its offices quickly. Another turning point came with fireproofing techniques. The Great Chicago Fire had left a lasting impression. Architects experimented with fire-resistant materials, terracotta, concrete, and new steel coatings. Each success built public confidence, encouraging taller and bolder constructions. Controversy remained, however. Some residents feared skyscrapers would dominate streets, obstruct light, or create dangerous wind tunnels. Critics also debated style. Should a skyscraper show its frame openly, or should it be masked with decoration? Chicago became a city of tension between progress and public taste. Architects had to convince the public that innovation and beauty could coexist. By the early 1900s, Chicago's skyline was no longer tentative. It had character, identity, and style. Each new tower reflected lessons learned from fire, economic hardship and technological experimentation. The city had earned a reputation as the birthplace of the modern skyscraper. The Reliance Building's original design included thin, fragile terracotta tiles on the facade. Builders had to reinforce them secretly during construction. Today, it stands as one of the first buildings to fully integrate steel, glass, and fireproof ornamentation. By the 1910s, Chicago's skyline had transformed. Skyscrapers rose in clusters, each competing for attention, height, and functionality. The city had become a proving ground for modern architecture. But with this dominance came controversy, public debate, and questions about the future of urban life. One key challenge was corporate ambition. Companies wanted tall, impressive buildings to signal power. The Merchants National Bank, Chicago Building, and others sought to assert status through height. Architects responded with bold designs, but some critics worried that the skyline prioritized business over human experience. Shadows, wind, and crowding were concerns for pedestrians below. Another tension arose around aesthetic consistency. The Chicago School had produced a range of styles, from Sullivan's ornamented vertical emphasis to Burnham's elegant facades. Some citizens loved the variety. Others felt the city lacked cohesion. Civic leaders debated whether new skyscrapers should follow a standard plan or remain free in style and expression. Technological progress continued to shape these debates. Steel and elevators allowed buildings to grow taller than ever. Fireproofing made skyscrapers safer, while electric lighting transformed interior spaces. But with innovation came anxiety. Each new height tested public imagination and confidence. Newspapers ran stories questioning whether skyscrapers were too tall or out of control. Residents argued over street shadows, wind tunnels, and air quality. Despite these tensions, the skyscraper movement created lasting consequences. Chicago became a global model for vertical urban design. Architects across the United States visited to study the Home Insurance Building, the Rookery, and the Reliance Building. Modern steel frame construction spread nationally. Chicago's emphasis on light, functionality, and fireproofing influenced early skyscrapers in New York, St. Louis, and beyond. Many early skyscrapers were privately financed by a single company or investor, risking entire fortunes. The Home Insurance Building's financiers were among the first to see that a tall, modern structure could be profitable, but only if carefully managed. This lesson shaped Chicago's real estate practices for decades. The legacy of Chicago's early skyscrapers lies not only in their height or technology, but in the debates they sparked. Each building was an experiment in balancing ambition with safety, beauty with function, and innovation with public acceptance. They represented a city willing to learn from disaster, adapt to challenges, and lead in design. By the mid-1910s, the stage was set for even taller skyscrapers and broader architectural movements. Chicago had demonstrated that a city could rise from ashes, survive economic storms, navigate public skepticism, and emerge stronger, bolder, and higher. The era of experimentation, risk, and aesthetic debate had firmly established Chicago as the birthplace of the modern skyscraper. The story of Chicago's skyscrapers is more than architecture. It is a story of ambition, courage, and the human desire to reach higher. From the ashes of the Great Fire to the steel frames of the Home Insurance Building, from public doubt to worldwide influence, Chicago proved that skyscrapers were not just buildings, they were symbols of resilience, innovation, and vision.